I'm going to hand you over to Pipo Serrano. He is the Managing Director of You Planet Productions, and he will kick off our first session. Good morning, Pipo.
Thank you. Thank you, Femi.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. It's great having you here. Thank you. Hello, everyone. How are you doing? I'm sure that as Femi was saying, if you've been going around this Congress on these days, or any Congress in the world about technology or smart, you've heard a lot about the concept of AI. Basically, it's the one we hear all the time. The thing is that we know everything about AI. We know how it evolves, how it's growing, how it's impacting several businesses. We know how it's disrupting lots of sectors, how it's going to affect our jobs. We are wondering if it's going to affect many of those. But now that it looked like we were quite conscious about climate change, I feel like we are talking very little about how AI is going to affect to all this. So in a way, I feel like we should question ourselves if artificial intelligence is finally going to solve our problems, or it's going to create many more. AI is a huge energy and water requirement, have caused some of the biggest technology companies to the world to miss their climate targets. You probably heard about that, and that's a huge problem. So the problem again, or the question here is, can we combine all these efficiencies of productivity, let's say, with a more sustainable AI? Well, to answer that, I'm very happy to share with you that today we'll share this stage with Dr. Stephanie Hare. She's author, broadcaster, and researcher. She co-presents BBC's AI Decoded and appears monthly on Business Matters. Her book, and maybe you read it, and if not, I recommend you do it. It's called Technology is Not Neutral, was named a Financial Times Best Book of Summer 2022, and it's on the Harvard Law School syllabus. She has also published in Financial Times, Harvard Business Review, Wired, and many other places. So, Stephanie, please join us. Welcome in. How are you doing?
Thank you.
Nice to see you.
Thank you so much.
I'm wondering if your next book, second volume, could be Technology is Not Carbon Neutral or something like that. You'll explain us. I'll leave you with Stephanie. She's got a brilliant presentation, and afterwards I'll be paying attention just down here. I will come up and share with you a couple of questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. How are you today? You recovering from the US election? I am not. So we're going to talk about AI and sustainability as a way of taking a small mental break from politics. Very, very quickly, this is the structure of the talk. We've only got 15 minutes. I'm going to go through quite briskly, and then we'll have time for Q&A afterwards. These slides are also available if you want them, or you can take pictures, so do what you want to do. So very, very quickly, I'm a professional researcher, and I'm also a broadcaster. I mainly work for the BBC World Service Radio and on television on a new show called Artificial Intelligence Decoded. And that's the book that I wrote that looks at how technology is not neutral. My challenge was to see how do we build technologies that maximize benefits and minimize harms. So that was the approach that I took to the BBC to say, wouldn't it be cool if we did a show on artificial intelligence? So every Thursday night at 9:30, or it would be 9:30 Spain time, it's 8:30 London time, we spend 30 minutes talking about the top stories in AI, and we also are bringing experts onto the show to interview them, and we're starting to go out into the field and report and do demos. So if you're interested in artificial intelligence, I really recommend it. The show goes straight onto YouTube afterwards, so no worries if you can't watch it on a Thursday night. But it's all because I thought, when I worked in cybersecurity, people would say that humans are the weakest link. All you need to do is click on a link and you'll download malware, you'll accidentally give data away or not set your privacy settings correctly, and then someone can use your data against you, right? And it puts a lot of responsibility on the human. That becomes a really big problem as we move into the age of AI. And so what I wanted to do was say, well, what if we actually flipped that on its head and made humans the strongest part? What would that look like? And what would we need to do differently? And I think education is a big part of that, and that's what the show is about and the book is about, and why I'm here today, is to get us having those conversations about the big issues. So the big issues that we've been covering in the show, you can really start to get a feel for how artificial intelligence is starting to permeate everything. Now that's happening at a different speed in different countries or in different sectors, different companies, different universities, just different individuals, depending on how interested you are in tech or not. But most of us are already using AI in some way and having it used on us. And you see, we covered a lot of things like misinformation, regulation, cybersecurity. AI is being used both to mount new attacks and to defend against them. So it's always the same side of the coin, right? The same coin. But we're looking at it in terms of sectors. So how is it affecting healthcare? What's it going to do to change investing and banking in the world of international finance? What is it going to mean for war and for law and fighting crime? So if you're the kind of person who, like me, likes to see things more in a table setting, these are the types of topics that we're covering. And you can see that we've really focused a lot on the safety governance aspect. That's because that was what was really in the focus in the past year. But we're moving now into some of these other topics. And I always take suggestions. So if there's something that you think we should be covering and we're not, please let me know. And you'll see that we've got an energy, environment, climate section. And that's what I'm going to be talking to you about today, because I think it's really the most important thing. And it relates so much to this theme of smart cities. AI is built on infrastructure. So how do we make that sustainable? That's going to be a real challenge. Now, when we go into the latest thinking on that, weirdly, we often have to go back to books. You know, paper, ink, the old school act of researching, writing, and then sending it out into the world, and all of you will read it and have that conversation on your own. So I'm giving you the highlights of a couple of books that you might not have come across that will help you get up to speed on thinking about AI and sustainability. This first one is Code Dependent. It's by the Financial Times artificial intelligence editor, Madhumita Murgia. I really like this book because it gets away from constantly talking about AI from Silicon Valley's perspective, or frankly, even London's perspective where I live. For some reason, both Americans and Brits like to think that they are the center of the world and where it's happening. And of course, that's not true. It's one of the reasons I'm so happy to be with you here today, is it's so important for all of us to get out in the world and see how technology is being used everywhere. The technology might be the same, but how it's being used is very different, right? Because it's context specific. This book has case studies that you're going to want to look at if you're interested in AI in terms of how it's being used in the global south, and frankly, just outside of a sort of rich Silicon Valley context. It gives us some of the concepts that you want to think about that relate to sustainability, like transparency of data and data sets, and how you would audit them. Explainability, which is how you would know how an AI makes a decision about you or your community or not. And accountability, which is making sure that we always are linking an outcome to a human. So that if you get a decision that you are not happy with or that you think is unfair, you should know how the decision was made, and if you need redress, if you need some justice, who you can contact. It should never just be computer says no. So this book is really fun for that, and it's very readable. You don't have to be deeply technical to read it. The next one, if you haven't come across this, it's very easy. It's about a 2-hour read. This is the book that if you're like, what is everyone talking about with generative AI? How do I use it or not? Because generative AI is the thing that has made Microsoft and Google and Amazon all blow past their carbon neutral commitments. It is so energy intensive and water intensive, and that's what we're going to focus on. But before you even get to that, you might also just want to make sure that you're completely up to speed. And the reason I like this is Professor Ethan Mullick. He is a professor at Wharton School of Business in the United States, where they do some of the best MBA education in the country. He is an AI evangelist. He quite likes generative AI. But I like this book because he plays fair, and he gives you a lot of the critiques and criticisms. You kind of need to know this in order to get into the sustainability piece. You need to know how the technology works to then understand why it's so energy intensive, right? It's part about like knowing, not knowing your opponent, but knowing your subject. And the third I would say, and this is very text heavy, so don't worry, I'll just talk you through it. This is a book that I feel, if you want to know about AI and the energy requirements and the sustainability piece and why certain companies are keeping that data rather than sharing it, this is the book for you. It just came out. It's been shortlisted for the Financial Times Business Book of the Year. It's written by a journalist, so it's actually very pacey. I read it like a thriller on a plane, burning fuel, which is not very sustainable. It's all about open AI versus DeepMind. It's about Sam Altman versus Sir Demis Hassabis, and it's about Google versus Microsoft. You can't have the sustainability conversation if you don't know this background, how these technologies came up, what the vision is of these leaders, the small companies, and then the big tech overlords. So before you even go into the climate, sustainability, smart cities piece, you kind of want to develop your pieces on the chessboard first. These 3 books, if you're looking for anything that's going to really give you an edge, even if you just picked one of them, you will be ahead of the game. If you were to read all 3, you'd be on this stage, I'm sure, giving a much better presentation than me. So on to the next bit. AI regulation. I decided not to update this slide based on certain developments yesterday, but to keep it as it is. So we'll do that part verbally. Last year, a bunch of people who won the Nobel Prize equivalent of computing, the Turing Prize, although Geoffrey Hinton also won the Nobel Prize just a couple of weeks ago for his work on AI. They were all giving statements saying they were worried that AI was going to wipe out humanity. They called this existential risk, which they labeled X risk, to be cool. They were saying they regretted their life's work. In the case of Yoshua Bengio, who works with the UK government on AI safety, he was saying that he was really glad to just get it all out there and get his feelings about it out there. He's just very worried. But then Yann LeCun, who works for Facebook, works for Meta, which does Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp, he thinks that there's nothing wrong with AI. We don't need to worry about killer robot scenarios and Skynet and anything that you might have seen in a sci-fi book. But then when you look at his reasoning, it's actually quite worrying, because he goes, no, computers are going to become more intelligent than humans. It's just a question of when. And he also says that if you realize that something is not safe, you just don't build it. Does that square with your experience of human history? Are we good as a species at not building things that we know are not safe? The regulators are also worried, but for a very different reason. Now, I can tell you that all 3 of these regulators, at least one of them is definitely retiring. That's the Danish Commissioner for Competition, Margrethe Vestager. Lina Khan, who's head of the FTC, and Gary Gensler, who's head of the SEC, that's the one that does like financial regulation in the US, both of them, now that we have a new US president elected, could potentially be out of a job. Mr. Gensler is the one I would say is most at risk. Ms. Khan may be kept, I'm not sure. So this is the potential out-of-date slide, but it was, as of 48 hours ago, still valid, and at least for the next 2 months. They are more worried about AI in terms of bias risk and discrimination. They're not worried about a sci-fi scenario that may or may not happen, like the 3 guys before them. They're worried about how AI is being used now. So it's important to know, when you sort of get into this space, when we're thinking about it from a climate sustainability perspective, where are the big players coming from? These people are not talking about sustainability, climate, energy, water use, how are we going to power these data centers? Not on their radar. They don't care. These people do, along with their own concerns. And that matters in terms of who has power and who's going to give us the information that we need to have the sustainability question. Hence why I'm introducing you to them if you don't know them already. There was a lot of chat about regulations since everybody started writing quite scary statements about AI killing all of humans. And so there's a lot of conversations happening at the moment. These are some of the things that you can see. It's the usual suspects, the UN, the G7, the White House executive order on AI. That's which an initiative by Joe Biden. Trump, I think, is going to tear it up. So politics matters when we want to talk about technology and when we want to talk about the climate, right, and sustainability. The United States and China are the 2 superpowers for AI. So in one country, you don't get to elect your officials, and in the other one, you do. And the United States just did. And that's going to have a major, major impact on AI regulation coming from that superpower where the biggest AI companies are and where there's the most money being invested. So that matters. You should know that. Something that is good, though, is we've got the AI Safety Institutes. Those were created at the last Safety Summit in the United Kingdom. So there's an AI Safety Institute in London, in the UK. There's one in the United States. There's one in Singapore. And then a bunch are coming on. They are looking at the safety of large language models. So that relates to our generative AI discussion earlier. They're looking to make sure that AI is safe. So that will still happen. I don't think Trump will tamper with that. That's more of a global initiative. You also, being here in the EU, I'm sure I don't have to tell you that we've got the EU AI Act coming online that was approved. Companies have a little bit of time to get compliant with it. They're already in the process of doing that. I still think it really didn't cover the sustainability and climate piece. It couldn't. You can't do everything with one piece of legislation. So my point is, you all have a real influence here in Europe to push for that. When we look at what can the European Union do on AI, is to keep pushing. You will then get a reply that too much regulation hinders innovation. And given who's now in the White House, and that's a party that's going to be very against regulation, you're going to start seeing fears here in Europe that if you regulate too much, Europe will fall behind and the United States will go ahead. None of which matters if we're talking about climate change and we just burn the planet. So you can see it becomes trying to square the circle. And this is the last bit that we're going to talk about, and I want to make sure we leave time for Q&A and discussion. So this is going to be the part that I hope is new, really new, which is AI's dirty secret. So I interviewed Professor Kate Crawford just over a year ago now. She wrote a book called The Atlas of AI, which really makes AI a very concrete, tangible topic, not abstract and in the cloud. She talks about how it's on the ground and what metals are needed to use and how human labor is going into it. Fabulous book. She also works at Microsoft. Microsoft, which has a big partnership with OpenAI, right? Hence where all the sort of threads start to come together. She told me that the question of the environmental cost of AI is the biggest secret in the industry right now, and that the enormous environmental costs of this are not being shared with the public. She talked specifically about water usage, because you need to cool the data centers down. She also talked about we need to be clear on what's fueling a data center. Is it coming from dirty fossil fuels? Is it coming from renewable energy? What is this? And the answer, of course, is the companies know, the big companies that are doing generative AI know, but they are not telling the public. So we have no data transparency whatsoever. We also, therefore, have no accountability. Because how can you hold somebody to account for something that you don't have the data for? That's, again, where regulation and lawmakers are going to have to step up, and also all of us, the public, if we care. So that was the first thing that told me we needed to look into this. I don't know if you're aware of this. I'm putting this on your radar, that every time somebody uses ChatGPT for like an average exchange, 20 to 50 sort of back and forths, it's the equivalent of taking half a liter of water and dumping it into the ground. There's 100 million weekly active users of ChatGPT using that amount of water every time. Once you get the transparency, you can go, that's a ton of water. Whoa, what are we doing about that? I don't need to tell you about all the places in the world right now that are having droughts, they're having water shortages, you're having people needing water for human consumption, for agriculture, and now for data centers. We're also looking, and you can see ChatGPT came out around the end of 2022, and you can see here what happens to all the big companies as they start going big on generative AI. It goes up. You can see it heading. And what I love is we picked poor Slovenia here as the example, but it's just to give you an idea that these companies are using the same amount of electricity as entire companies. That is only set to increase. That will not go down, it will go up. So the footprint for this, carbon and water, is going to be bigger, and we have no answer for this. It's more carbon intensive. Again, read Kate Crawford's book, The Atlas of AI, if you're like, I'm not really understanding this feels so abstract. Data centers, when people talk about the cloud, when Amazon is going big on the cloud, this is what they're talking about. We're talking about emission from cement, steel, microchips, right? You've got to power all of this, and you've got to cool all of this. Everybody's electricity grid in every country on Earth is not ready, is not fit for purpose for where the AI revolution is going. So, to square the circle, you may have noticed, and I'm hoping that if you haven't, that we're putting it on your radar now, that a lot of the big American companies have started to announce that they're going to be purchasing nuclear energy or getting their own small modular reactors. The cost for a small modular reactor, they're called SMRs, is enormous. These take ages to do. That's going to become a competition issue because only a few companies in the world can afford to do that. Does that help reduce the carbon emissions? Yes. Does it create other problems? Potentially also, yes. There's perhaps a safety risk, et cetera. But you can understand from the company's point of view, they are committed. Some of these companies, and we will often frame them as evil big tech, they're also some of the ones who've been most aggressive on trying to reduce their carbon footprint. So they see this as a way of making all of us happy. And so that's going to be the big question is, who else can get in on this? And what does that mean? For instance, here we are in Europe. What European companies who are looking to get into AI, or who are in AI already, are going to be able to get their own small modular reactors? And if you're in a country like Germany that has very recently gone back on nuclear, will they have to go forward? Will we see another U-turn there? France has a very strong nuclear fleet. Is France better positioned? So this all becomes a thing that doesn't feel like it's going to relate to you perhaps in the moment, but it will. It's coming, and I'm here to, I hope, put that on your radar and into your thinking as to why. Because countries and communities will be making decisions about where to build this type of infrastructure, how to pay for it, again, how to make it so that it's a fair competition issue. And is nuclear actually the better way? Or is there a way that we can combine different energy sources? We've got this is the last slide, you'll be delighted to know. We've got the next AI Safety Summit. It's the AI Action Summit. It's in Paris in February. This is going to be really interesting because the focus is a climate focus. So if this topic interests you, I urge you to tune in February and even in the roundup to it. We're looking at energy and water demands of AI. You will be extremely well prepared by then, if you're not already. AI's ecological impact, and finally, getting back to that transparency point, a ranking system of the greenest AI companies. There's some very cool work that's being done by a researcher named Sasha Lucioni at Hugging Face, looking at having, just like if you wanted to have, like, you go on TripAdvisor and you want a ranking system for a hotel or a restaurant, 5 stars, 3 stars, which one are you going to pick? You could get a ranking system for which AI platform you're going to use. Which one's the most energy efficient? Which, if you run a business and you have your own sustainability and climate commitments, you might need to be passing that on, that information to your investors. That ranking system becomes very important. So people are building this. I don't want to send anybody out of this talk feeling dismay and despair. The problem has been named. It is known. Some of the best researchers in the world are working on it. Now government is taking an interest, and you've got the corporate response as well. Pay attention to the February summit in Paris if you want to see where that conversation is going. And what I would say in terms of what you can do as individuals is push for that transparency. Ask for it from suppliers, from partners, having that discussion in your own organization. I wrote a book called Technology is Not Neutral, and I have to tell you that watching what's happening with AI, I am more convinced than ever that that is true. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Stephanie. You can sit down a bit. Well, as Stephanie announced previously, if you have any question you would like to share with her, we'll be pleased to listen to you. So in case any of you want to ask anything, just raise your hand and someone will help you to get to the mic. We've got some mics in every corridor. Stephanie, this is really mind-blowing. It's really impressive. But you said something that I presume is very important, and it's probably what can make a big change, which is politics matter. And if politics matter, it means that we need some regulation that, instead of harming innovation, can regulate with innovation, such as sandboxes, or there are plenty of ways to do it. But how are we going to make it if we've got some of the big players in the thing who probably prefer to grow rapidly without having in mind if they waste energy or not, like China, and probably in the next 4 years, America?
Well, I mean, that's the question I think that a lot of Europeans I speak to are worried about. They're worried that if we just keep regulating here in the EU, we lead on regulation, that might harm our competitive abilities. And what I would say is, I think that's certainly a risk. I wonder, though, if there's a way of actually working with the companies and getting everybody to agree. Like, the standard is you just have to be transparent about what energy sources you're using, how much it is, and the water consumption, because it really matters. It's actually a national security issue. You can imagine the nightmare that would happen if a city actually came to a point where it was choosing to give water to a data center rather than its population. that could happen. I mean, it's a terrible scenario, but that can happen. So citizens have a right to know, and governments usually want to be part of that. That could be part of their good citizenship story. So I think we're going to have to work with the companies on that and make sure that they're not penalized for being transparent. They almost need to be rewarded for it.
It makes sense, but if you point out companies, some days ago I was thinking on our conversation, and I was presuming, maybe I'm wrong, I hope I'm wrong, companies were starting to pay attention to the effects on climate of whatever they do, their footprint. Are they now more worried about their P&L again than their footprint in terms of having AI, empowering their businesses, making efficient everything, having, I'm kind of worried on that.
Well, I think, again, so much of this feels like in life, it all comes down to marketing. Do you want to see this as an onerous cost on the business, or are you using AI and actually demonstrating to your own customers that AI is helping you to be more cost efficient, more energy efficient, et cetera? It's the whole, we say in English, like, do you eat your own dog food? Do you eat your own product? I think that's going to have to be the way. If Microsoft and Google and Amazon can't be transparent about this, that to me as a researcher, that tells me that's exactly where we need to look, because what are they hiding? They should want to lead and model what transparency looks like in this space.
That sounds interesting. If any of you want to make a question, we've got like 3 more minutes. Just raise your hand, or if you can come closer to the corridor, and we'll make the question. Let me ask you something related to that, Google on that, and it has to do with one of your slides. I was quite impressive that in the more carbon-intensive companies, it was on the very top, Meta. Yeah. And at the very bottom, Google. How do you explain that?
Meta has gone really, really big on AI, like massive.
Is it?
Yeah.
That much?
I mean, I don't have the figures.
I mean, in Google is at the bottom. I mean, and they are with Gemini, and they're working hard to.
But they were holding back a lot, and I think Meta has been releasing more, and as part of the open source model, they've now said that they're handing over their models to the US military, et cetera. So it's funny because you may have noticed they were missing from the nuclear power slide. That's because Mark Zuckerberg did put in an application. He wants to build his own nuclear reactor, but it had to go through planning permission, and they found out that the place where they wanted to build it is where a bunch of rare bees live, like little bees. So they couldn't build it. So he has to look somewhere else. So it just goes to show you, when we talk about climate and sustainability, even for things like planning permission, it's affecting, it's mattering.
Let's listen to someone who wants to ask you a question. If you can introduce yourself and
Hello. Yeah, my name is Enoch. I'm from the German Development Cooperation Agency, and working for the International Smart Cities Network. So we're in talk with a lot of smart cities the world over. And what we observe sometimes is that by now the AI hype is so great that people or organizations throw the technology simply at any process. And so sometimes it seems so highly over-engineered to throw LLMs at processes that could be easily done, through old school open linked data theories or these kind of things. So when you mention EU regulation and all of this, one of the big principles of maybe also European heritage is the subsidiarity principle of saying, let's solve things, at that technology level that can, do it the best. So I wonder, with the big AI discourse, maybe also with regard to the Paris conference, is there some talk of still comparing AI, LLM approaches and all this to really established solutions that could achieve the same thing with far less resource intensity? Or are we really just having the talk of comparing AI models against each others, and ranking now them, because it's just such a truism that we have to use AI on everything?
Yeah, your point is so well made, and thank you for that. Where to start? So yes, there is all sorts of discussions about where is AI appropriate to use, where is it the best tool? It's the whole thing of, if you want to kill a fly, you could do it dropping a nuclear bomb on it, but that's going to obviously have other problems, or you could just get a fly spotter or a newspaper, right? There's a cost thing, there's a risk thing, et cetera, and that's probably true with all technologies. So yes, I think that's where transparency comes in. When you read the books and you first of all see, like, okay, you could use generative AI, but it gets things wrong, and it also just invents things. And then you're like, ooh, it's quite energy intensive. Then you have to ask yourself, is this really the right tool for what I need to do? If I need to be accurate, and if I care about sustainability and climate, you'll hopefully make that decision. And so that's what I think this summit's going to be doing, and what I hope this talk has done, is to get people thinking about that and going, do I need to use this? Because sometimes you might. If you're using AI to optimize public transport in a city or energy efficiency in a big building, absolutely. I think like in that case, like the gains outweigh the cost, the footprint. Do you need it to do traditional search when you're writing an essay? Probably not.
Let's go with the second question fast because we are running out of time. So let's see if we can make it
Thank
fast.
you. Joan Michelson, Electric Ladies podcast. Hi,
Hello.
Dr. Hare. Look forward to it. Copyright. You haven't mentioned that in your discussion about regulatory issues.
Yep.
You and I are both journalists and content producers, and there are a lot of people here. So can you address where you think that's going and the different countries? Because there are people some news organizations are saying, we won't participate, and they're actually suing Meta and Google, et cetera, for blocking its use in ChatGPT, their content, because of copyright.
Yep.
And they're not being compensated for it. On the other hand, you have ChatGPT spewing garbage a lot of the time. I can't tell you how many inaccurate facts I've gotten.
Yeah, no, again, great question. So there's a lot of lawsuits that are currently working their way through to being litigated. And until we have the outcomes, and I'm with you, I also would like to get those legal outcomes as soon as possible so we can point to the cases and go, a court found that can't be done. I mean, Sam Altman was very open, Sam Altman of OpenAI, saying unless we can basically forget copyright and just suck up everything, we can't do what we need to do. So I mean, he's very clear that his entire business model violates copyright. Worryingly, at least in the UK where I'm based, the government's really toying with the idea of letting everybody who works in AI just view the world as open source content, if you will, and just go for it, basically doing what Sam Altman would love to do. And then people are pushing back. No doubt, as all these things tend to be in life, you will get some sort of really unsatisfactory middle ground solution. So maybe people get paid if they opt in. So some people have signed up to work with OpenAI and others and are getting financial compensation in return, and other people are opting out. But until we get those legal decisions, I can't really say much more in terms of where I think it's going to go. I myself don't know. I talked to one of the bigger law firms in London who said they think we'll have one of the first case results next summer. So watch this space. As soon as I know, trust me, I will be doing a show on it to tell everybody about it. But again, that's the transparency point. Once you learn what tool you're using, you're like, oh my God. The problem is if you're a time-pressed person who needs to use generative AI, maybe you're just going to whip it out and not care about the moral side of your product.
Stephanie, I'm so sorry because this is so interesting, but we run out of time like by 8 minutes. So thank you very much for sharing your thoughts, your ideas. Such interesting.
My pleasure.
You can follow her everywhere, even also in Elon Musk platform, unfortunately,
Yep.
but we'll follow you. Thank you. Thank you
Your
very
friend's
much.
close, but your enemy's closer.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thanks.
Thank you so
Thank you, Pipo. Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you, Femi.